In the previous chapter, we saw that the monster was successful in persuading Victor to create a mate for him, and then the monster also swears that he will disappear into exile with his mate, and then he suddenly leaves. Now, in this chapter 18, we find that Victor is really unwilling to begin his task, and in fact, he spends many sad weeks in Geneva. After he returns from one of his solitary works, now his father brings up the subject of his marriage, expected marriage to Elizabeth, as we all know that Victor's mother Caroline wanted Victor to marry Elizabeth. But Victor is filled with again, horror and dismay at the thought of an quote unquote immediate union, because we have seen that Victor's reaction to the prospect of marriage with Elizabeth is something very unusual, and it also highlights on his aversion towards sexuality, that it shows that he's as if he's afraid of his own sexuality. So when the subject of his marriage with Elizabeth is brought up by his father, he's again filled with horror, and then he decides that he must create the monster's companion before his marriage takes place, and therefore he leaves for England. And here, in this chapter, we find that Victor invents the whole travel episode. He presents before his father as if he's going on a tour, but actually what he does, he's trying to hide the true nature of his work, because Alphonse Frankenstein, Victor's father, is not aware of his work. And then we find that Victor again involves himself in studies, and he begins to know about he begins his study in order to know the latest developments that have taken place in scientific community. Now, when Alphonse Frankenstein brings up the subject of Victor and Elizabeth's marriage, again it emphasizes the importance of family and connection, because if Victor marries Elizabeth, then what would happen? Their family would grow, and it also establishes the fact that how much connection is important between family members. But although Victor decides to begin creating the female companion for the monster, for this first creature that he created, but he's really afraid concerning the monster's threat. And we find that he's completely reluctant to carry out the work in his father's place, because he doesn't want his father to know the true nature of his work, and that's why he arranges a tour with Clerval. And it is decided that Henry Clerval, his close friend, would initially join him on his travels. And then this chapter concludes with a very good description of their journey through Germany and Holland. And from there it shows it is narrated that they depart from Rotterdam, and then they arrive in London. As far as Victor's fear of his own sexuality is concerned, it is confirmed by his tendency to refer repeatedly to a union rather than a marriage. We never find Victor using the word marriage. Instead, we find him referring to it as a union. Victor is also afraid about the monster's threat, because he does not know, after having met the creature, the female companion, female mate for him, whether he would really keep his promise or not. And we find that although he travels amidst nature, but this time this embedded fear in Victor does not allow him to receive any comfort from nature. Nature therefore fails to provide any kind of comfort to Victor this time. So we find that Victor is basically torn by his promise to the monster, because he has already promised the monster to create a companion for him, and he also possesses the knowledge that if he fails to create a companion, then it would lead to horrible consequences for his family. And as far as the monster's threat is concerned, Victor is actually very, very afraid, because the question keeps on hovering in his mind, that if the monster would follow him or stay behind. But Victor is very much confident that the monster would follow him, and therefore Victor, now we find that he leaves Geneva knowing what task awaits him, and therefore he gathers all the courage to repeat the terrible experiment for the second time. And he's so distraught, he's so disturbed with this thought that again he'll have to, engage himself with that terrible, filthy process of creating another creature, that the natural scenery fails to cheer him up, fails to provide any comfort to him. And as I already mentioned, that Victor is also joined by Clerval, and the journey up the Rhine River to the North Sea. Chapter 19 is a kind of, is written in a way that it reminds us of the travelogues, that is, travel stories that were that became very popular in the 19th century. And in this chapter, we find that Victor and Henry, they spent some time in London, and after that, they set off for Scotland, and they make plans to visit the rest of England. Now, this very visit provides much delight to Henry, but Victor keeps on brooding, and he visits the philosophers who have got the latest scientific information. And Clerval and Henry, they both go to Oxford. And here Victor suggests that he and Henry, they should part their ways, because Victor knows very well that he has to carry on with his plan, of which Henry is completely unaware, and therefore he chooses a relatively uninhabited island in the Orkney Island chain, so that nobody is able to see Victor, and Victor can finish his work in solitude, being out of sight of anyone who may suspect his intentions. So here we can see that a very uninhabited island is chosen by Victor for creating the second creature, and it also shows the significance of this place, because this is the remotest Orkney Islands. And Victor, in fact, he travels to one of the remotest Orkney Islands to begin his new creation. There he hires a hut, and he advances in the labor, which with every passing day becomes more and more horrible and disturbing for him. And at the same time, we find that Victor is filled with forebodings of evil. He's always anxious that something evil is going to happen to him and his family. So once again, we find Victor alienating himself from his family and friends in order to create the second creature. And the kind of enthusiasm, the kind of energy and excitement that we had seen in Victor Frankenstein while he was creating the first creature, that enthusiasm is completely replaced by horror this time, while he embarks on creating the second creature. Why? This is because Victor is afraid because Victor is afraid that the second creature might turn out to be more terrible, more dangerous than the first one. So he's very, very horrified, and therefore there is not even an iota of enthusiasm in Victor while he begins to work on the second creature. So as I said, this chapter reminds us of the travelogues, the travel stories. Okay, and once again, Victor alienates himself from others in order to carry out his task. And Victor's dilemma is also seen in this chapter because, although he begins to create the female companion, he gathers the latest information about the scientific advancements that have taken place, but still he's depressed with the thought of what he must do again. And at the same time, for Victor, this process is like a torture for him because again he has to gather the raw materials for a second creature. And Victor's dilemma arises because his mind and heart both are in a state of confusion. He is in a state of dilemma. He cannot decide whether he should whether he should create a female companion or not. And at the same time, he's aware of the threat given to him by the monster as well. So is mixed. We find that Victor has mixed feelings. And as far as the setting is concerned, as I said, the significance of the choice of the place made by Victor, it is also very significant because he deliberately picks a very desolate island off the coast of Scotland. And at the same time, we readers we do not know how he find body parts on this practically uninhabited island in order to create the second creature, and that is not even made clear by Shelley. Next, we move on to chapter 20, and in this chapter we find that Victor begins his work in order to create a second female monster. Now, after following Victor and Henry through mainland Europe and England, the monster comes near Victor's workshop in Scotland in order to see his mate. Here in chapter 20, we find that Victor gradually becomes sick by his task, and he seems to have second thoughts with regard to the creation of the second creature. He begins to consider further the the potentially disastrous effects of creating a mate for the monster, because as I said that Victor feels that this second creature might be more dangerous, might be more terrible than the first one. So this thought, although he has begun the process of creating this new female creature, but then he re-examines his past experience, and he also considers his present situation, and he's really afraid about the new creation because he feels that the new creation may turn out to be worse than his first creation. And at the same time, he has these thoughts in his mind that this new creature may not agree to the promises that have been made between Victor and the monster. So he's having these second thoughts, and he's also in a state of confusion and dilemma. And since after his first creation, he had gone through several unpleasant experiences. He had lost his near and dear ones. Okay, it is his guilt that makes him re-examine his past experiences over and over again, as well as his present situation. And now I already mentioned in the previous slide that Shelley has not made clear how Victor got the pieces to create a new creature. So although Victor's reasoning here appears to be very sophistical. The term sophistical means false. Like, although he has begun to work on the second creature, but still, as I said, he's seeking for excuses, so that he doesn't have to keep his promise that he made to the monster. And here in this chapter, although Victor speaks of sophisms, meaning false arguments of the monster. Now, whatever arguments had been put forward by the monster in order to convince Victor to create a companion for him, here in this chapter we find that Victor begins to consider those arguments placed by the monster to be false. Okay, he says that his arguments are false. They might be persuasive, they might have convinced him successfully, but those arguments are false. But the but the but the reality is Victor's own reasoning here appears to be false. In fact, as I said, he's trying to find out excuses so that he doesn't have to create the female companion for the monster. And then, as I said, that the monster reaches Victor's workshop in order to view his mate. What happens? And the monster appears at the window, and Victor immediately, out of anger and reading that malignancy, that wickedness in the ghastly green, or let's say in the smile of the white smile of the monster, what he does, he immediately tears apart the new creation before the monster's eyes, and the monster begins to howl in despair and leaves. But then he soon returns and utters the chilling words and gives a warning and threatens his creator. He tells Victor, "I shall be with you on your wedding night." So after this, we find that Victor, the monster, returns to Victor's lab, his workshop, only to find out why Victor ruined his mate. And as I said, the arguments, Victor considers the monster's arguments to be false, though persuasive, and both of them involve in an argument. And then the monster gives this threat that he will be with him on his wedding night. And later on in the novel, we shall find that the monster will fulfill his warning. Later in that the monster will later fulfill this warning in the novel. So, as far as Victor is concerned, Victor feels that Victor feels that his second creation might endanger the entire human race, because he has already seen the consequences of his first creation. And when he saw the monster at the window, he felt so horrified, and he felt so angry, and he found the monster to be so malignant after seeing his smile that he simply destroyed the female creature, the female met before his eyes. And later on, in this very chapter, we again find that Victor receives a letter from Clerval, and then he agrees to join him for the trip home. He sets off in a boat in order to throw down whatever instruments he had used in order to create the creature. He sets off in a boat and he throws them into the sea, gets lost into the sea. Victor gets lost and is washed ashore in Ireland. And after that, Victor is immediately arrested in connection with a murder. In chapter 21, another unfortunate incident takes place. Henry Clerval's body is washed ashore, and the method of death is familiar. Clerval is also found with the black marks of fingers on his neck, and since Victor appears around the same time, several people suspect him for the crime, even though he had not been present near the scene of a crime. Two witnesses saw a large creature deposit the body of Henry Clerval on the beach and leave. After this, Victor is taken before the magistrate, where he comes to know about Clerval's death, where that he is found on the shore with black finger marks on his neck, and this makes him recall William's murder, and Victor again becomes agitated. He becomes so agitated that it arouses the suspicion of the magistrate further. He's taken to see the dead body and is really horrified to find that it is Clerval. Victor gets very sick, and then he's carried out of the room in convulsions, where he spends 2 months in fever, and there he confesses. And it is in his delirium that Victor confesses to the murders of William, Justin, and Clerval. And the magistrate is very kind here is very kind, and he does his best for Victor, and he brings his father to Ireland. However, Mr. Corwin, the local magistrate, as I said, all of them together go to see Clerval's body, which leads to Victor's sickness, and he suffers from fever for 2 consecutive months, and then he confesses everything in that state of delirium, and a trial. Therefore, Victor is now held in prison, and as far as the magistrate is concerned, he's kind enough to send a nurse and doctor to return him to good health. It is at the trial that Victor is eventually released. When the court learns of Victor's residence on the Orkney Islands, it is decided that he is innocent, and therefore Victor is acquitted. But it is to be noted that Victor is filled with remorse and guilt, and therefore he cannot enjoy his freedom. Although he has been freed by law, but still he is unable to enjoy his freedom. And we can understand here that when Victor confesses everything in his delirium, okay, once more he associates himself with the monster, because we know that Victor is responsible for the creation of the monster, but he is not the one who killed William, Justin, or Clerval. So here we find that Victor associates himself with the monster. And as far as his horror is concerned, he's so filled with horror and guilt and remorse that we find that he keeps on having, nightmares which keep on haunting him. And these horrific nightmares, the terrible nightmares that haunt him, show that Victor's horror actually lies in his mind, in his psyche. And after that, his father, Alphonse Frankenstein, takes Victor home, and they both travel from Ireland to Le Havre, France, and overland to Paris, where they stay for some time. Now, it is to be noted here that now that the tour which was started by Victor and Henry together, with the purpose of receiving pleasure, with the purpose of relaxing for some time, it turned out to be completely ironic. Neither of them received pleasure nor relaxation. Rather, the entire tour that they undertook led to tragedy for both of them. Victor lost his close friend, Henry Clerval, and Henry met his untimely death. And after Victor got released, he becomes completely determined now to watch over his family in Geneva and wait for the next appearance of the monster. So Victor not only suffers mental anguish, but after having worked to create a second creature, he also endures the toils of a prisoner. And now he's all set to wait for the next appearance of the monster, because he knows that the monster would not leave so easily. It would wreak something havoc upon him and his family.